You know, the moment my dad, veins popping in his neck, pointed his finger right into my face and screamed, "You and your kid are just freeloaders, you owe us." While standing in the living room of the 3,000 square foot house that I owned and paid for. That was the moment I realized the person I thought I knew as my father was a complete stranger. It wasn't just the words, it was the raw, unadulterated entitlement in his eyes, the same entitlement I'd seen my entire life, but now aimed at me, a financially independent adult who had bent over backward for them. I literally looked around the room, at the furniture I bought, the walls I painted, the mortgage I paid every month, and I thought, is this a joke? Am I being punked? But the shock quickly turned into a cold, hard rage I'd never felt before. They came to me for help, and I opened my home, my life and my wallet, only for them to turn around and spit in my face. So, I had to make a choice: let them walk all over me and destroy my peace, or end it all, immediately, no matter the cost. Tell me, honestly, would you have tolerated being called a freeloader by the people you saved from homelessness? Especially when you have a young child to protect. Because what I did next, it was nuclear, and I need to know if I was wrong. My life wasn't supposed to be like this, an accidental landlord to my own parents. Things were finally looking up for me. I'm a single mother, and my daughter, Maya, is the light of my world. She's only 4, and everything I do, every late night I work, every extra shift, is for her. A few years ago, I finally achieved a lifelong dream and bought a beautiful, large house in a fantastic school district. I poured everything into that house. My savings, my time, my sweat. It was my sanctuary, our sanctuary. I had a solid job working remotely as a data analyst. Maya was thriving in her preschool, and we had a routine that brought me so much peace. My parents, well, they were always a source of low-level chaos, but geographically, they were far enough away that it rarely impacted my day-to-day life. My mother, bless her heart, was always financially optimistic, let's just say. My father, a proud man who always chased get-rich-quick schemes, but never seemed to catch one. They lived in a different state, had a small rental apartment, and I'd usually get the expected phone call once a month asking for a small loan to cover an unexpected bill, which, naturally, was never paid back. I factored it in as the cost of having parents. Then came the call that changed everything. It was about 9 months ago, a cold November evening. My mom called me sobbing. Her voice was thin, almost unrecognizable. They had been evicted, not just asked to leave, but literally locked out. Turns out my dad's latest, guaranteed investment opportunity, had tanked, and they'd blown through several months of rent trying to recover their losses, all without telling the landlord or me. Now they were essentially homeless, living out of a cheap motel for a few nights, and utterly panicked. My mother begged me, weeping and pleading, asking if they could just stay with me for a little while, just until they got back on their feet. She promised it would only be a couple of weeks, maybe a month at most, and that they would contribute to groceries and bills. She stressed how much she missed seeing Maya, how she'd love to help with childcare, how they'd be barely noticeable. I was hesitant. My peace, my routine, my house, they were so important to me and Maya. But they were my parents. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The thought of them, my own mother and father, being cold and scared in a motel room, it was too much. Plus, the house was big. It had a fully finished basement with its own entrance, bedroom, and bathroom. A perfect, self-contained apartment. It wouldn't even be that disruptive. It was the right thing to do. I told myself they'd be gone in a month. I told myself I was a good daughter. So, I flew them out. I paid for their flights. I bought them a few groceries to get started. I helped them move their meager possessions into the basement apartment. The first 2 weeks were okay. My mom was helpful. She played with Maya. She seemed genuinely grateful. My dad kept to himself, mostly in the basement, supposedly applying for jobs. But that's where the mask started to slip. The first sign was when they started creeping upstairs more and more. It started with my mom just needing to use the oven because the one downstairs is old, which was a lie. It was a brand new oven. Then it was my dad needing to use the main living room TV because the basement one was too small for the football game. Soon, they weren't in the basement at all during the day. They were upstairs, using my space, drinking my coffee, and running up my utilities. The promise of 2 weeks turned into 4. 4 turned into 8. They were still not contributing a dime. When I gently brought it up to my mom, she'd just sigh dramatically and say, "Oh honey, you know how hard it is to get a job at our age. We're working on it. Just be patient." The groceries they had bought were gone in 3 days. And then they were constantly eating the food I bought for Maya and me. I found myself having to hide snacks and specific ingredients just so I could cook my daughter's favorite meals. It felt like I was back in high school, sneaking around my own house. The breaking point, the real erosion of my peace, came with Maya. My mom started trying to dictate how I parented. If Maya was having a tantrum, my mom would rush in and undermine me, giving Maya the toy or the sweet I just firmly denied her, just to stop the crying. When I pulled my mother aside and told her, "Mom, you have to let me handle her. You can't undermine my authority," her face hardened. "Oh, I see. So now you're a perfect parent. I raised you just fine. You're too strict. You should be grateful I'm here to teach you how to be a mother." That was the moment the guests became occupants, not just physically, but emotionally. They weren't grateful people trying to get back on their feet. They were resentful people who felt entitled to my space and my rules. They started criticizing everything, my jobs. "When are you going to get a real job where you leave the house? My friends. That friend of yours is a bad influence on Maya, and even my cooking. This soup is a little bland, isn't it?" My own house, my sanctuary, became a battlefield of passive aggression and constant judgment. I started getting knots in my stomach every morning when I woke up, dreading the sound of their voices. Maya, who used to be so bubbly and happy, started asking me, "Mommy, why are Grandma and Grandpa always yelling?" They weren't yelling at us yet, but the tension was so thick, even a 4-year-old could feel it. They had a roof over their head, all their needs met, zero financial stress, and yet they were miserable, and determined to make me miserable too. It all culminated a few weeks ago, and this is where I need you, the audience, to really weigh in. I had been saving up for a much-needed family vacation, just a small trip to the coast for Maya and me. I had finally booked the dates and the hotel, and I was so excited. I told my mother over dinner, trying to keep the enthusiasm up despite their usual gloom. "Mom, guess what? Maya and I are taking a little trip next month, just a quick few days at the beach. We're so excited." My mother didn't smile. She frowned, looked over at my dad and said, "A vacation? A vacation? How can you think of taking a vacation when we're still here struggling?" My jaw practically dropped. "Mom, I've paid for everything for you for 9 months. I have zero obligation to put my life on hold indefinitely." That's when my dad chimed in, putting down his fork. A fork that he didn't pay for, eating food that he didn't pay for. "This is exactly what I mean, Susan. You're selfish. You've been sitting on all this money, flaunting your wealth with this big house and your fancy job, while your own parents are in your basement. You could easily give us a couple $1,000s to get an apartment, but you choose to spend it on a frivolous trip." And that was the straw, the final, splintering break. I tried to stay calm, I really did. I put my fork down. "Dad, I am not giving you money that I worked for to fund your next get-rich-quick scheme. I gave you a place to live, food, and security for nearly a year. You promised me a month." He stood up, towering over me, and that's when he pointed his finger and screamed those awful, unforgivable words, the ones that opened this story. "You and your kid are just freeloaders. You owe us for raising you. You owe us." So that was the situation I was in. They were literally calling me a freeloader in my own house, demanding the money I earned, and trying to sabotage a simple vacation for my daughter and me. The audacity, the pure, distilled nerve of it, was breathtaking. They felt they had a right to my life, my money, my home, and my parenting choices. I was trapped, my house was no longer my own, and my mental health was in the gutter. I looked at their faces, contorted in righteous anger, and I knew, I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to give. Before I tell you what happened next, the decision I made, and the spectacular way I ended this whole situation, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have tried to be the bigger person and continue to tolerate it? Would you have just given them the money to get rid of them, or would you have gone to war to reclaim your peace? Seriously, tell me, because I went to war and it wasn't pretty. I didn't say another word after his awful outburst. I just stared at him, this man who was supposed to be my protector, and I felt nothing but a hollow, dead emptiness. I walked away from the dinner table, upstairs, and I locked myself in my bedroom. I cried, but only for about 5 minutes. Then, the tears stopped, and the planning started. This was no longer about family. This was about self-preservation and protecting my child. The first thing I did was call a real estate attorney. I explained the situation, and his advice was clear. I had provided them a domicile, and they were technically tenants at will, meaning I couldn't just throw them out in an hour without legal repercussions. I had to issue a formal, written notice to vacate, the exact duration of which depended on the state law, but usually 30 days. 30 more days of their toxic presence. Absolutely not. That attorney gave me the legal framework, but I knew I needed a psychological weapon, something that would make them want to leave before the legal clock ran out. That's when I remembered their biggest fear. My father had a bizarre, crippling phobia of mice and rats, an irrational terror that made him physically ill. The basement apartment, being a basement, had had a few minor, completely normal insect issues months ago that I had dealt with, but they knew about them. The next morning, I was a different person. I was cold, polite, and completely detached. My mother tried to apologize half-heartedly for the TSS night. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "There's nothing to apologize for, Mom. I understand exactly where we stand now." I didn't engage. My first move was administrative. I emailed them both a professionally worded notice to quit and vacate, giving them the maximum legal notice, 30 days. I printed a copy and taped it right to the refrigerator. They saw it, and the color drained from their faces, but they still had hope. "You can't be serious, Susan. Where are we supposed to go?" my mom wailed. "That, Mom," I said, "is not my problem. You have 30 days. Then, I started my war of attrition. The very first thing to go was the Wi-Fi password. My father spent all day streaming things, and my mother was glued to her tablet. I changed the password, didn't tell them, and when they asked, I simply said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you were still here. Since you're not contributing to the bills, I've had to make cuts to my budget. The Wi-Fi is now restricted to my home office for work purposes only. You can use a library if you need the internet." They were livid, but they couldn't argue. Next, the thermostat. I locked the Nest thermostat. I set it to a chilly 65 as circ text F in the day and an even colder, the 62 the text F at night. When my mother complained that she was freezing, I just said, "I'm so sorry, Mom. But I have a huge mortgage and an electricity bill. I'm trying to keep the costs down to save for that trip you were so worried about. I'm trying not to be a freeloader, you see." Every word was a razor blade, delivered with a smile. The final, decisive move, the one that broke them, was my father's phobia. I went to a pet store and bought a package of plastic highly realistic black toy rats, the kind used for Halloween decorations. I spent the afternoon placing them in strategic, highly visible locations in the basement apartment while they were out at the mall. One was halfway under the sofa, its long plastic tail clearly visible. Another was positioned on top of the air conditioning unit, near the vents. But the masterpiece was the one I placed right inside their pantry, half-eaten chip bag next to it. When they returned, I overheard my father go down to get a snack. Then, the sound that followed was spectacular. A choked, high-pitched shriek, followed by the clatter of a cane hitting the floor. My mother rushed down, and then came a scream of her own. They were in a state of absolute panic. I didn't rush down. I just walked to the top of the stairs and said, in a calm, flat voice, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I've been seeing a lot of activity lately. I'm sure it's nothing, but, it's an old basement. You might want to keep your food sealed up." I gave them a shrug and walked back into the living room, where I happily put on a cartoon for Maya. They were out in less than 72 hours. Not the full 30 days, but 3 days. They spent one night in the basement, wide awake, terrified of a plastic toy. The next day, they called a friend in another state, begging for a place to stay. They packed their bags that night. And the third morning, my father came up, his face gray and defeated. "We're leaving, Susan," he mumbled. "Good," I said, not looking up from my laptop. My mother tried one last, desperate guilt trip. "We can't believe you're doing this to your own mother. You're going to regret this when we're gone." I finally looked at her, and I made sure my expression was one of genuine pity. "I regret letting you stay for 9 months, Mom. I regret letting you destroy my peace and call me a freeloader in my own house. I will never regret prioritizing my daughter and my own sanity. You have my lawyer's contact information regarding your forwarding address." And with that, they were gone. No final hug, no tearful goodbye, just the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway, taking the toxic air with it. The aftermath was immediate and healing. The silence in the house was deafeningly wonderful. Maya instantly became her cheerful self again, asking, "Mommy, where did Grandma and Grandpa go? It's so quiet." I simply told her they found a new place and were happy now, and that we were going to the beach. My siblings, who I had kept out of the drama, were initially shocked. But when I told them about the freeloader comment, and the way they had treated Maya, they sided with me instantly and completely. My parents tried to call and text for about a month, varying between pleas for money and angry accusations, but I blocked them on everything. I decided that my mental health and my daughter's happiness were more valuable than a relationship with people who only saw me as a wallet and a free hotel. I went on that vacation with Maya, and it was the most relaxing, joyful trip of my life. I haven't spoken to them since, and my life has been immeasurably better. The peace I lost has been fully restored. So, that's my story. I reclaimed my house, I reclaimed my life, and I stood up to the two people who thought they had a lifetime lease on my generosity and obedience. It was brutal, it was cold, and yes, the plastic rats were a little dramatic, but it worked. I would do it again in a heartbeat to protect my child and my sanctuary. I think the real lesson here is that sometimes, the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters are actually the emotional squatters in your life, and you have to evict them for your own sake. Like this video if you were on my side, and you think I handled the situation exactly right. Subscribe for more stories like this where people finally stand up for themselves. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Did I take it too far with the psychological warfare, or was it the only way to get my home back? I want to read all your opinions. I'll see you all in the next story.